web conference that we're organizing, EU-Canada conference, which was originally on site. So we're doing this virtually, and this is the first edition. And we're planning to do more like this in order to reach out for Canada and Europe, even after the pandemic, because yes, there will be life after pandemic, and we'll go through this. This conference is organized by the Canada-Europe Economic Chamber, along with the EDC in London. So welcome again. The moderator, first I would like to advise you that our moderator originally, Melina Howard from Luxembourg, from Lexfield. I couldn't make it. Something came up and we had to find a solution on a short notice. So I will be the moderator for today, and I hope that I'll do hopefully a good job, as Melina did a few times with our conference. Now, today's subject is how Canada is positioned in the new EU-UK reality. And obviously, we're going to talk about post-Brexit, the new EU-UK deal, which happened to be signed on the 24th of December. I do remember well. So that was a Christmas gift for all Europeans, including UK citizens. Just a reminder, with obvious reminder, that UK is not going anywhere. It's geographically where you're staying at the same place and along with the EU. And also we're going to talk about the agreement between Canada and the UK that has been signed also last year, at the end of last year. And with all that, CETA, where CETA does take place, what's difference with CETA between Canada and the European Union, between Canada and UK, and between the EU and the UK as well. For that matter, we have the privilege and honor to have with us three conference speakers that knows a thing or two about doing business in Europe and on trade agreements as well. So starting with Olga Wolf, because she's the Senior Regional Manager for Western Europe at EDC in London. Also, Robert Brandt, he's the Managing Partner at McCarthy Tétrault, also in London. And last but not least, Michael Lawrence, he's the Head of International for the Law Society of England and Wales, also based out of London. So let's start with a brief introduction of our conference speakers, and then we'll jump right into the webinar itself. Do we have Olga? Maybe we can start with Olga if she's there. I think I don't see her. I cannot hear her. Let's start with Robert. Robert, can you present yourself for about 2 minutes? And then.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Sam, and thanks to the Chamber for having me. As Sam mentioned, I'm the Managing Partner of McCarthy Tétrault's London office. I've been in London for 23 years. Before that, I practiced law in Toronto. McCarthy Tétrault is a large full-service law firm in Canada, offices in New York and London as well. We've been around for 170 years. We've been helping companies on both sides of the Atlantic do more business since before Canada was a country, and looking forward to the discussion.
Great. What about you, Michael?
Thank you, Sam. And as you said, I am the Head of International at the Law Society of England and Wales, the professional body for solicitors. My role involves supporting UK law firms and international law firms in their international practice, as well as promoting all that England and Wales has to offer in the legal sphere. So English and Welsh common law as a governing law for international contracts, and England and Wales as a jurisdiction for dispute resolution. And it's because of that role that I have worked very closely with the UK government, the Ministry of Justice, the Department for International Trade, the Department of for Business, on a wide range of trade issues over the past few years. So obviously the negotiation with the EU over the trade and cooperation agreement, but also all the work plans on trade agreements with other parts of the world, including Canada, and coming up next, the US, Australia, New Zealand, and possibly the CPTPP. So delighted to join this session and look forward to the discussion.
Great. Olga, you just, the timing is right, you just came back. We cannot see you, and I don't think we're going to solve that problem, but I think we can hear you. Can you present yourself, Olga?
Thank you, Sam, and it's a pleasure to be here. So I'm, as Sam mentioned, I'm the Senior Regional Manager for Europe based in London, UK. EDC opened London representation in 2015, and it is essentially the hub for the EMEA region with offices in London, Düsseldorf, Istanbul, Dubai, and Johannesburg. And obviously, as EDC's mandate is to help Canadian companies grow, and succeed internationally, that's what we're doing out of London for this part of the universe. Thank you.
That's great. So let's jump into the webinar itself, which there's many, things to talk about, and many territory to know about more of what's coming ahead. So the first question I would like to ask you, and is the first come first serve. If how is the Brexit transition currently going in the UK right now? Translation, how are you? If anyone can answer.
I'm happy to give it a go. Obviously, we're adapting to a new reality, and in some ways discovering with hindsight the many benefits of being in a customs union and in a single market. So obviously having the TCA, the Trade and Cooperation Agreement, is something to be welcome. But beyond the headline of no tariffs and no quotas on goods, trading goods, which is obviously great news, I think we see the resurgence of issues which may have been forgotten about, and at least for companies which were not trading outside of the EU. So it's things like rules of origin, phytosanitary checks, VAT, and custom duties. Obviously, all these issues have hit the headline in the past 3 or 4 weeks. Obviously, I'm more concerned with trade in services and particularly trade in legal services. And on that, I would say that we may actually be helped with the fact that there is not much international business travel taking place at this stage, as certainly there would have been further issues hitting the headlines of newspaper. And I suppose that time give us the opportunity to prepare and to be ready for the new realities of business without free movement of people with the EU. So I think that's my initial take on the question.
Robert, as a Canadian in London since many years, how do you do?
Yeah, it's a funny time. I'm not sure how much to attribute to Brexit transition, but it's nice to have Brexit behind us to some extent. We're going to be, of course, negotiating for years and years to come over all of the details, which still have to be worked out. I've got a couple of clients who are frustrated with the transition and issues at the border, but that was always going to be the case, I think, when you have such a fundamental change in the relationship that has been the way it has been for decades. There was always going to be a tricky transition period. We're probably fortunate in some ways because the amount of traffic, people are not moving at the moment, obviously, and goods traffic is down for reasons, partly because there was a lot of stockpiling before the end of the year, and also because of the pandemic. And so it's hard to, we're not living in normal times. It's hard to assess, but there are definitely some frustrations. The papers are, certain papers anyway, are those stories of border frustrations, and I've got a couple of clients who've definitely experienced that.
All right.
So,
that's an intro question, so we're going to get into more details in the minutes to come, that's for sure. Olga, your take on that, how are you? It's just a general question, an intro question. How's the UK is doing right now, business-wise?
That's a very good starting question, and I would echo that. Definitely the deal and having the deal gives certainty to both businesses and investors, because a number of them were essentially holding off and waiting for the outcome of the negotiations. It's probably also too early to tell what the impact will be on different sectors in the long run, and this will partly depend on how different companies and different sectors cope with all the changing rules, and also the non-tariff so-called technical barriers. Of course, we are seeing some delays and disruptions already, more so to some sectors like agri-food. But as was mentioned, there was pre-Brexit stockpiling, and probably this time of the year is still relatively quiet, sort of after Christmas. So we'll see the full impact in the months to come, as also everyone looks through details. As we know, devil is in the details. So what to say on that? True.
Thank you. Second question, a bit deeper now into the subjects. Since 1 month now, and that's why we've chosen this this date actually, to give us a certain idea of what was going on, you know, within a month. It just it's a tiny frame line, but it will give us an idea of what's in the months ahead. So since 1 month now, what have you seen so far of the impact, real impact, some examples of post-Brexit for the UK, Canada included, and the EU? If you can share with us some examples. I'm going to quote something, a line from a friend. It's get Brexit done. You've probably heard that, but now it's probably get Brexit work. So maybe you're in the process of doing that, and that's a quote from Michel Troubescois, Avisa Partners, which I salute. So if you can go deeper into, so I repeat the question, what's the impact of post-Brexit for the UK, Canada included, and even the EU? What's your experience, or if you can share some examples? Maybe starting with Robert this time.
Sure, I can give you a couple of real life examples in that get Brexit done. Wouldn't it be nice if it really was done? I think, at least I hope, in the UK we're done arguing about whether we should or shouldn't leave. I think that argument is done, and now we've got arguments about whether certain parts of the Union will leave the UK, and then we've got ongoing discussions with Europe, working out all the details that haven't been worked out yet.
I believe Boris Johnson is actually in Scotland, isn't it?
He is, that's right. And so the Union, at least in my time here, it's only 23 years, but it's never been as disunited as it is in my experience, and that's sad. But in some of these problems, it's hard to know whether they're just teething problems, like the UK government says, or whether they are going to be real detriments to doing cross-border work. I like to think they're teething problems, but I have one Canadian client that has been frustrated exporting to the UK in the last couple of weeks,
Okay.
trying to get the paperwork correct, and it's just decided that they're going to wait, and so they're stopping shipping to the UK for the time being, while they make sure they've got other things going on. And they said it's just too much hassle now to change in the paperwork.
Can I ask you in what field this Canadian company is in?
It's in clothing, apparel.
Okay.
And so they're still shipping to the EU. There's no change in that relationship. They've decided for the time being that they don't want some of the hassles with some of the new paperwork to get their goods into the UK. I've also got a UK client that is in the food business and has had some of its ingredients spoil at the border, trying to get fish oil in. And so in the meantime, they've now sourced a UK supplier, a little bit different product and not exactly what they wanted, but that's what they're doing in the short term. So I'm seeing some frustrations and some real life examples of the border is not as seamless as it was a month ago.
Mikhail, your share on that.
Sure. I mean, we've already, touched upon these issues, the extra paperwork. I mean, some of them will be indeed teething problems, getting used to, the new forms, the codes to use and so on. But, some of it will have indeed an impact on supply chains, on the cost of getting supplies from the EU to the UK and from the UK to the EU, and that may well impact on the strategic and commercial decisions which will be taken by a number of companies across a wide range of sectors. I think, there is that new Brexit reality. There is also the impact of the pandemic, and yes, there's been, increased stockpiling before the end of the transition period, but also we have to remember that there is, issues of ports being clogged up at the moment by empty containers, since the beginning of the pandemic, and it's been difficult to shift, obviously, all these containers which take place. So we have seen suppliers avoiding the UK at the moment, while these issues, both these issues of port capacity and paperwork are being resolved. I think what I'd like to mention as well, again, looking at trade in services and more probably the professional and business services sector, it's the change from free movement of people rules. So things are not going to be, once international travel resumes, things are not going to be as easy as jumping on a Eurostar or jumping on a plane, meeting client, providing services there, getting paid for these services. It would take a bit more time to check, do I need a visa or not? How long can I stay? What services can I provide during that time? Can I be paid for that meeting or not? And to organize the movement, secondment of individual from offices to the other. So I think it's there is also that to take into account in that new trade realities. Some of it will be overcome. We'll get used to it. Others will have impact on supply chains and trade relationships.
Right, Olga.
Well, other than I had to renew my British passport this summer, and other than it having the same color now as my Canadian passport, so I will have to look inside depending on where I travel, as opposed to just choosing by color. What we see is, it's interesting. So we haven't been made aware of any disruptions or delays experienced by our Canadian customers on the export import. It's what we hear from different clients is it's a little bit asymmetric at the moment, and partially due to the checks and rules staggering over 6 months that the UK chose to take. So there is less of disruption probably going into the UK than on the exporting side. And on the exporting side, it's obviously seafood and meat producers, so the agri-food sector, and also, you know, we've seen Port of Dover hitting the front lines, which is probably not surprising given that the way it is set up. So it offers the shortest crossing into the EU. So basically anything time critical would go through Dover, which creates some bottlenecks. And also most of what Dover does is roll-off services, and those are seen as the major bottleneck for Brexit, more so than even containers. What we also have heard that a lot of ports, they've been investing in infrastructure in preparation for Brexit. So namely in sort of storage capacity, but a lot of them are still going through the implementation or developing and introducing border control posts in key locations prior to July 1st. So it seems like July 1st, other than Canada Day, of course, but that will be the next date to watch for what really happens after that.
I note one of the word or keyword that you've mentioned, the first two example was paperwork. That's what I've read too, the impact, the direct impact of the post-Brexit reality is that there's more paperwork, either for individuals or companies. So it slows down things a little bit. And one thing that that you've mentioned, Michael, is that we haven't seen the impact, the full impact yet, because of the pandemic, because of the lockdowns, and et cetera, et cetera. So, all right. So now, more specifically, with the EU and UK, what are the trade and cooperation agreement highlights, and what this means for Canadian exporters and investors about the new EU-UK trade agreement that has been signed on the 24th of December, the very last days of 2020. Maybe Robert, you can go ahead with that.
Sure, I'll mention the I guess the most obvious, and it has been talked about, but there are, I think at last count, something like 800 UK companies, subsidiaries of Canadian companies, and a lot of those companies have set up in the UK because for the last 40 or 50 years, the UK was a gateway to Europe.
Exactly.
And they can no longer assume that that is the case in any given sector. And so if you look at the services sector, and such an important part of the UK economy, and that is not part of this deal. And I'm not sure I've even read why that's not part of this deal. It may have just been seen as too complicated and would have taken too long. But the EU must be pleased about how negotiations turned out. They got goods dealt with where EU is strong, and services is not dealt with yet, where the UK is strong. And so whether it's financial services where the Canadians are strong, you see them now diverting investment and having to set up proper hubs on the continent or in Ireland. And so whereas in the past, the question of increased investment in Europe might have been about when or how do we expand the London operations, there's now two places to consider, and considerations about whether we invest in London or invest in Europe. And so
where in Europe, Robert, they're thinking of when they're not thinking about London?
In financial services with the Canadians, we've seen Dublin has been popular, and Luxembourg.
Okay.
And so those places have been a big beneficiary of increased investment from Canadian banks and financial institutions.
Mikael, your thought on that? On the question, the highlights on the agreement. What are the main highlights for our audience here to understand what's happening? What's
yeah, I mean, I'm very happy, and again, I understand that mostly for the question is in relation to Canadian exporters and investors. But I think, I mean, to follow up on what Robert said, it's whether you can still use the UK as a base for EU trade. And to some extent, the response will depend on the sector. We've talked about, you know, the impact on supply chains, you know, the rules of origins to be applied, the phytosanitary checks to be applied. So I think when you review your business, when you review your supply chains, you need to be satisfied that trade can continue, or you need to put you know, contingency solutions in place, and there may indeed you know, be moving some operations from the UK to the EU, but actually work both ways. You know, can you supply the UK from you know, a base in Belgium, in Ireland, or in France? And I think you need to look at that. Obviously, they're both important market for the EU. You know, I can't remember the exact figure, but 450 million plus customer market, really impressive. But the UK is still significant with 67, 68 million customers as well. So these to take place, and any work. You know, it worked both ways. I mean, in the media reports on the first month post-transition period, and there have been all these stories about actually digital retailers from Germany, from Sweden, and so on, finding or facing a lot of difficulties to send their goods, you know, across to the UK, and UK customers having facing you know, custom duties and VAT. So it's, I think, again, I think you need to understand that at the level of each sector and each company before, you know, drawing conclusion as to whether it's required or not.
Olga, I'm re-asking the question, Canadian, the agreement highlights on the EU-UK. What's the impact for Canadian investors and exporters?
Yeah, so probably sort of to not to repeat, but to complement all the good points already outlined. On the services side, what we have been noting is that obviously on the banking side, it seems like all banks or services in general, it was a hedging game, because a lot of them went ahead of this deal and made sure to establish continent, Luxembourg, Paris, depends also on which part of operations were moved, or where the particular strengths of the company lie. On the other side of the services, we have seen that companies, including Canadian companies that are present in the UK, they were also establishing offices in continental Europe. And even though they don't know any changes or disruptions, and they told us they don't expect any, but it provides them with a hedge in case professional designations, UK professional designations, are not recognized by the EU. And the specific choice of office there was driven more by the company's strategy. So some may have established in the same places as financial services. Others would have opted for the Nordics, just because of the nature of their businesses. And then probably to add on the rules of origin, so the 1-year grace period that was agreed between the UK and EU, this effectively provides companies with more time to adjust and to figure out their supply chains and where it makes sense to establish certain production or make any moves if they are required. But largely, I would say that for Canadian companies, probably on the paperwork side, maybe with some exemptions, they are much more used to filing the paperwork when exporting to the UK than, for example, EU companies that didn't have to deal with that.
Right. Let's continue with you, Olga, about what role EDC play as assisting or reassuring Canadian and international companies, well, Canadian for that matter, not international, but about post-Brexit. How do you assist Canadian companies in that situation?
Thank you. No, that's a very good question, and obviously for EDC, we're absolutely committed to supporting Canadian exports and investments into the UK market and into the EU. So, for example, if we talk about the UK, then in 2019, Canada exported about 20 billion in goods to the UK and over 4 billion in services. So both markets remain Canada's major trading partners. So for us, the role that EDC played in supporting Canadian businesses, either with insurance products to mitigate risks, or with financing and capital, working capital, or any other financing solutions that enable Canadian companies to export, that obviously stays. And when it comes to Canadian investors, I think that's what we'll see is that those investors that were waiting for certainty to make their decisions as to where to put the money, then that will simply determine where EDC can provide support. So we'll just support them in those markets that they choose to invest into.
Robert, you do assist Canadian companies in order to cover the UK market and the European market, and maybe all over the world from London. What's your share on that? How do you assist those Canadian companies, and what are you telling them right now?
Right now, we're telling them that the UK market is still a massive market on its own. It's still a world-leading economy, and there are opportunities for Canada because the UK government is desperate for some evidence that there's a world beyond the EU, and so over the next few years, as Canada negotiates a more comprehensive trade agreement with the UK, there will be opportunities, and I think even before then, as the UK government tries to attract other markets. And for those Canadian companies who are in the UK because it is a gateway to Europe, that market isn't going away, and the two sides will have to find a way to make trade work. I was reminded the other day that the Canada-US trade relationship has had its ups and downs over the years, and almost exactly 50 years ago, Canada was suffering from some punitive duties from the US and was not exempted, and felt that pain, and the government at the time decided that never again should the Canadian economy be so reliant on US trade. And at that time, around 1970, 74% of Canada's trade was with the US. And so a massive diversification effort was undertaken. And 50 years later, 75% of Canada's trade is done with the US. The big neighbors are always going to be your biggest trading partners, and the EU and the UK are always going to be big, important trading partners to each other. You'd like to think with Brexit done in name at least, and some of the bigger items that supporters of Brexit wanted to see, and with a bit more control over affairs, that trade will be allowed to continue, and that they'll find ways to ease some of the frictions at the border. And so I'm optimistic the trade relationship will endure, and Canadian companies will play an important part in that.
You've talked about 50 years ago, Canada, the trade relations between Canada and the US. 47 years ago, just as a reminder, UK entered the EU. So there's maybe something there. Mikhail, what's your thought on that about Canada? How Canada is now, what's the importance of Canada as a trade partner for the UK now that the UK is out of the EU?
Sure. I mean, I was going to talk to you a bit about legal services as well,
Sure,
which is obviously the sector I represent, and obviously my role, as I mentioned in the introduction, is very much to support UK and international law firms in international legal practice, and actually Brexit doesn't really impact on the centrality of London as a legal centre where we have 200 foreign law firm based there. And during the Brexit process, during this past 4 or 5 years, we've had new foreign law firms opening up in London, from China, from Mexico, including from the EU as well. And likewise, I talked about the importance of English law in international contract and England and Wales as a jurisdiction for dispute resolution. That is not so much impacted by Brexit. So many international law firms will still look at London for a base for their for servicing the city. The financial and professional services sector in the city, for servicing their clients, and also to some extent for some of the Europe work as well. I think the big question for us is about advice on EU law, which is of significance for international companies. And it's not so much that you cannot do it from the UK anymore, but the key question is whether that advice you're providing attracts EU legal professional privilege. And I'm sorry for introducing quite a technical concept, but at the basis of the rule of law, the fact that as a client, you can go and see a lawyer, and that this legal advice remains confidential, and that authorities cannot seize it and cannot use that legal advice against you. The Court of Justice of the EU has a very narrow interpretation of who should have EU legal professional privilege. Essentially, it's EU and EEA qualified lawyers in private practice. What that has meant is that EU qualified lawyers have actually become quite hot commodity in, even more than ever in London. It may also be that some UK firm, national or regional size firms will open up in the EU for the first time to have, to continue having that EU law capability, but with EU qualified lawyers working for them. And it may be true of some US law firms, Canadian law firms, which have so far used London as a basis for servicing all of the EU, all of Europe.
I take the opportunity for the audience to invite the audience. If you have any questions, don't hesitate. Put your question, and maybe I will take some questions during the webinar, not only at the end of the webinar, but during the webinar if it's relevant. I think, let me see here. There is one. Cynthia Roy, what would you recommend for a Canadian cosmetic company who is already present into the Europe market and would like to expand in the UK? Who wants to take that question? Maybe Olga, maybe you should, what would you recommend for a Canadian cosmetic company who is already present into the European market and would like to expand into the UK? It's a general question. Maybe Robert, you have an idea on that.
Yeah, it's a very general question, and I would say that any expansion into any market is no different whether we have Brexit or no. So essentially, without knowing what specifically the company does, it's about understanding the market and who the major, basically whom the company wants to sell the products to, who will be the company's customers. And in terms of expansion, it's a trade-off whether it's expansion, and the question is simply, well, we want to expand, i.e. Sort of south from the EU, or it is better to have a presence in the UK because potentially because of Brexit and the implications, for example, the VAT issues. So what maybe what I didn't say during the major session is that VAT, obviously, we see this as a major topic right now, and our colleagues in Trade Commissioner Services here in London, they're getting quite a few questions from Canadian companies. And for some, that would be sort of definitely a point to consider when making decisions. So I would say just do the due diligence on that, and around any other issues that involve sale and potential implications from Brexit. And by all means, if there are any questions, then it is worthwhile, I would say, to get in touch with Trade Commissioner Services, because they are able to either advise or also put in touch with relevant companies to help this transition as smooth as possible.
All right.
I'll just add, Sam.
Sure.
Just to say, I wish I could answer more specifically about the sector, but generally, we're talking about getting goods from Europe into the UK to facilitate expansion. At least for the time being, the UK government is phasing in the new customs requirements at the border. The EU has had a hard stop change to their processes, but the UK government is phasing in though, so it's a lot easier to get things from Europe into the UK, and I think it will be for a while. It's much easier to come this way than it is to get from the UK into Europe at the moment.
Okay, thank you, Robert. I'll jump into the next question, and time flies, so I have many questions, and there's another question from the audience that I would like to address. But Canada was the second country after Japan, I believe, to sign a transition agreement on a bilateral free trade agreement with the UK. Where is that putting Canada between the new EU-UK trade relations, knowing that Canada has also a free trade agreement with the European Union? I'm sure you do, a CETA. Again, how's Canada in all this?
I'm happy to start on this. I mean, to be honest, I'm not sure Canada was the second FTA. I mean, it's certainly a recent FTA,
Right.
but the UK, once the Brexit decision was was confirmed, I had to do a lot of work in relation to the existing free trade agreements that the EU had with a wide range of other countries, and I think we are talking about something like 55 agreements with 70 countries around the world. And sadly, the Department for International Trade in the UK had a really intensive work program to secure continuity agreements with these countries, which sometimes involved long negotiations. It wasn't as simple as cutting and pasting. Obviously, some of these countries saw that as an opportunity to get better deals out of the UK as well, or sometimes the UK wanted to get to go further in some of these agreements. So I remember for my working a couple of years ago on the continuity agreement between the UK and South Korea. And that agreement is important for the legal services sector. Not many free trade agreements are significant for the legal services sector, but this was one because we had 5 UK law firms which were relying on an EU license to remain in Seoul, in South Korea. And without the UK-Korea agreement being agreed, they would have had to leave South Korea. So that was very significant for us. The UK has now completed most of that work stream on continuity agreement, but actually some are still missing. I mean, Ghana, I think it hit the headlines a few weeks ago. Obviously, it's a Commonwealth countries, strong historical and cultural links with the UK, but no FTA, continuity FTA in place now that the end of the transition period, or the transition period, has ended. And I think to look at the UK-Canada, I think one of the key question for us is, I mean, I think at the moment, at this stage, so it's replicating more or less the provisions that we had in the EU-Canada CETA agreement. But I think one of the questions moving forward is, can we go further? So many of these continuity agreements have review clauses, review provisions for the UK and Canada in that example to review the trade agreement in 3 or 4 years' time, and can we go further on that? And on this, maybe I'll take an example which is relevant to legal service and professional and business services, which is the mechanism for mutual recognition of professional qualification, which is actually one of the disappointments of the EU-UK CCA. They replicated the Canadian model, or the CETA model, which means that professional bodies, competent authorities, have got to put a proposal to the Partnership Council or the Joint Committee in the CETA example, and they have got to give their agreement to that MRPQ, Mutual Recognition Agreement mechanism. Now, the Canadian and the European architects put a proposal to the Joint Committee 2 years ago, and they still haven't had the go-ahead from the European Commission and the Canadian government and provinces. You know, these may be complex issues, but I think it shows that that there is a way to review and to go further in the new UK-Canada agreement. Obviously, when the review comes forward in 3 or 4 years' time, and I think probably because of the cultural, historical links, it may be an issue where Canada and the UK can go a lot further than Canada and EU on that particular issue, whether it's for legal services or accountancy, architects, auditors, engineers.
As for a reminder, before the agreement has been signed between the EU and the UK, we were talking a lot about a Canada-style trade agreement. So Canada was on the forefront of how an agreement should be done between the EU and UK. Robert, do you have any thoughts on that?
I was just going to say, when you talk about where does Canada's place now between the UK and Europe, I think it's an opportunity. We're a good friend and ally to both. There's going to be a little bit more competition between both markets for our business, and there is this 3-year time frame to negotiate a more comprehensive free trade agreement with the UK. And I think there are some opportunities to get more access to the UK market for Canadian companies.
I like to have those questions from the audience. They are very interesting, and I think in a whole, the whole web conference is more interesting. So here we go with Michel Troubescois from Avisa Partner in Brussels. The question is, and feel free if you want one of the 3 speakers to answer, feel free, I'm not going to point you out. The important question is to know if the trade policy of the UK government will diverge from the EU. The more they will diverge from EU norms, the less they will be competitive. Is there a plan to establish a Singapore over the Thames? I like the question. Who wants to answer that question?
I'll take one stab. I think we will diverge over time in certain areas. Financial services is maybe the obvious one. Some comments even today from some senior figures suggesting that there will never be an agreement to recognize UK equivalents, and so we will naturally diverge and compete over time. But as far as Singapore on Thames, I don't personally think there's the political will in this country to do that. There are factions probably within the current government who like that idea to entice business, but I just can't see that getting the political support. I think there'll be a lot of political pressure to maintain the high standards that companies and others are already abiding by.
I'll jump into another audience question. Richard Rumbelow, my understanding is that the UK-Canada Continuity Agreement will not be ratified until Q1 or possibly Q2. An interim workaround has been agreed to provide some continuity in trade in goods. Goods and services is based on GATS for the interim period. Both countries have agreed to strengthen the continuity agreement to further negotiation this year. There's no question mark. I don't know if it's a comment or a question, but any thought on that?
I mean, I think Richard may be right in terms of the timeline. I mean, certainly it was important for the UK government to secure as many continuity agreements as possible. If provisional application is to be given even on limited part of the agreement, that is, that is positive as well. I've nothing to add there.
All right. Many Canadian companies are based out of London or the UK to cover Europe and beyond. Are they still operating in the same way now? What are the adjustments that have been made so far? Robert or Olga, any thoughts on that?
I can quickly comment on what we see. So all the Canadian companies that are based out of London or the UK that we're dealing with, they, to the best of our knowledge, they continue to operate. and basically in the same manner. Probably to what I mentioned, and what we see is that, and especially on the services side, if companies they have chosen to establish European presence, to basically make sure that there is no adverse impact, and as a hedge, whether it's because of professional designations, or passporting, or in case of financial services, or something else. Where we may see changes as well is on because of the disruptions caused for exporting. At least right now, what we see, it may make sense for companies that are based here and that export to the EU. They may find it's easier to basically establish also presence in the EU, and then keep on sort of operating from two locations. But that's something that we're yet to see.
And how do you think the agreement or in the process between Canada and the UK will help Canadian companies to continue to do business in the UK or from the UK? I know we've been talking around that question, but more specifically, what's the agreement that has been signed later last year in 2020 between the UK and Canada? What are the impacts of that for Canadian companies? And what's the future look like for Canadian companies? Robert.
Well, I'd say in theory, it's business as usual as a result of the interim agreement, or actually memorandum. First of all, stepping back in November, there was a continuity agreement agreed between the UK and Canada, but it needs to be passed by Parliament. So as Richard pointed out, there's a process that's still ongoing to approve that in federal Parliament. And because there wasn't time to do that before the end of the year, another interim understanding was reached in a memorandum of understanding to give effect to a lot of what the continuity agreement was trying to achieve. And so that was signed right at the end of December, and that effectively brings tariffs back to zero the way they were under CETA, but does it in a little bit different way. And so there are, again, different forms to complete if you're a Canadian importing. And so that's a process that's a little bit different, but the result should be the same. And for goods that were already in transit, there are rebates available. And the idea is that there's a 3-year period in which these interim measures will have effect, giving both sides enough time to negotiate a proper free trade agreement that goes a bit further than CETA did. And it sounds like there's goodwill on both sides, and confidence that they will be able to do a little bit more than was achieved in CETA. So we'll be watching for that. We'll see how much bandwidth the UK government has to negotiate free trade agreements with the rest of the world all at the same time. But Canada should be one of the easier ones.
Right, and you know, I know that you are all based out of London, but now for the next question, specifically talking about Canada and the position of Canada, and that's the main question of the webinar. How do you position Canada, knowing that we have the CETA agreement and now we have the UK agreement? And I tend to say that Canada can be the UK, the new UK for Europe or the European Union, and in a certain way, Canada can be the starting point, or one of the starting point of a new trade territory for UK. So how do you see Canada positioned within all those free trade agreements? Michael, your thoughts on that from London?
Thank you, and I hope I understood the question correctly. I mean, for me,
Yeah.
obviously CETA is in place. We've got the continuity agreement or certainly interim application with the UK. What we said before is like the EU is a huge market. The UK is a significant market in itself. I think Canada would want to be present or Canadian companies, would want to be present in both markets. And in terms of, Canadian presence or influence in the EU, again, if it's part of the question, obviously there may have been the thought that, the UK was a close ally. And when while the UK was part of the EU, there was easy channel of communication between, let's say, Canada and the UK. I don't see that as an impediment to Canada. I mean, we've already talked about links with Ireland. I mean, for Quebec, there's the links with France as well. So I think Canada would want to be strongly present in the EU as well as in the UK. Again, hoping that I understood your question correctly.
No, it's just an opportunity for Canada to put itself out there and to be an alternative for the European Union as a new UK. Maybe it's easier to do business directly to Canada than now in the UK. It's just a question. I'm not stating anything. I'm just questioning if it's a good add-on to what's been going on for the last decades. And that was the whole idea behind that question. Same thing between the trade relationship between the UK and Canada. In a certain point, obviously, as Canada is so small compared to the European Union. But at the same time, as you were mentioning, frequently London and the UK is the gateway to Europe and maybe the world. Now, Canada could be the gateway to North America and to a certain extent to many free trade agreements as well. So Canada, strategically speaking, is well positioned. Your thoughts on that, Robert?
Yeah, I agree. There's massive change, and that creates opportunities. And so one of the interesting things will be to see whether the UK joins the Trans-Pacific Partnership and how that works. But Canada is well positioned, I think, with both markets, and in the past probably relied on the UK market politically and economically to access Europe, and now needs to go direct to Europe. And so I think politically that's happening more and more, not just reliant on the UK to understand how Europe works, but needing to develop the relationships directly with Europe, and that will mean Canadian companies need to do the same.
How do you foresee the economic trades between the UK, Canada, and the UK and the EU? So talking about the future now, how do you foresee? It's been a month since the economic reality has changed. It's still a work in process, as we've stated. Get Brexit work now, I think, on your side. Well, on both sides, as you've mentioned frequently during this webinar, it's on both sides. That's true. And how do you foresee those three territories working together? Olga, maybe.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. And I would say that this question is probably linked to the previous one. So obviously, the fact that Canada has agreements with there is CETA with the EU, there is sort of the transitional agreement, which will turn hopefully into the full FTA between Canada and the UK, and these provides continuity and sort of opportunities in the same manner as we had before. Canada can be a springboard for other markets, but also now that the UK is chartering its own future and will establish a number of its own free trade agreements, this will open additional opportunities for Canada, because the UK may in turn be a springboard for other markets for Canadian companies, where, for example, we don't have when in Canada a direct free trade agreement or as strong footprint as UK or UK companies may have. So it's kind of I would say, looking maybe on the bright side of that, it just opens additional opportunities, but it doesn't diminish opportunities for Canada. And we will also see that supply chains between the UK and EU, they will be changed, and this will be driven by a number of factors. So ultimately, there will be opportunities for Canadian companies to fill in the gaps where, for example, UK companies may decide to leave this supply chain.
Any additional thoughts on that question, or that how do you foresee the trade relationship between those three territories? Maybe I can move on to.
Sorry, Sam, if I can make a reflection on that, and it's more a general reflection, because during the Brexit process, obviously many statements were made in the UK about global Britain moving forward, and obviously the fact that yes, we wanted trade with the EU, but we wanted to be out of the European Union. And in some ways, there is a reflection on the importance of remaining importance of geography or close proximity in trade relations as well, which sometimes is forgotten. I mean, obviously we've got a revolution in digital means, and obviously the pandemic has shown us that we can do a lot more things remotely, but proximity still matters. And when one looks at the trade partners of the UK, I think Ireland is more or less at the same level as China. So Ireland of 5 million inhabitants is more or less the equivalent of a China of 1.5 billion inhabitants. If you look at the top 10 trading partners for the UK, yes, the US is there, yes, China is there, but otherwise it's very much Belgium, the Netherlands, France, Germany, Ireland, and European markets. So yes, there's a lot of opportunities for trade between both Canada and the EU, and Canada and the UK. And the digital revolution obviously can help develop new trade patterns. But in terms of goods, I think there is still that constraint that sometimes is forgotten. So that's why also Canadian companies need to look at a base in the EU or in the UK. And indeed, I'd quite like the the comment of actually looking at Canada for opportunities in the North American continent as well, using the USMCA and the opportunities there.
Interesting, and that's why we're having those webinars in the afternoon, Brussels time, so Canada can reach out to us and ask questions and know more about Europe in a whole, and be more interested either or both to the UK and the EU. I've got a question from Leon. Please listen carefully, as it could be mixed up. How much of a Canada-EU trade is in fact now Canada-UK trade? How much of Canada-UK trade went for continent and will now go directly from Canada to EU? It's a tricky one. We want to answer to that. I guess underlying the question is there have been any shift of export imports that you can foresee between those three territories or between two bilateral relationship, Canada, UK, or UK, EU? Have you seen so far, or do you foresee any changes in the near future?
I certainly haven't seen any data, and it may be too early to draw conclusions on that. I mean, however, all the factors that we have discussed this afternoon in Europe or this morning in Canada, will certainly impact on trade figures. So the need to review your supply chains, the need to sometimes make strategic or commercial decision as to the future of indeed your commercial relations or your trade relations with both markets. So I suspect there'll be a shift, but I think, I haven't got any figures as yet on how it has translated into reality, and it may be too early, after 1 month to see that translated in figures. Not to mention that these figures will probably not be published for another few months.
Exactly. I've got a question, which is, to put things in context. Before the pandemic, we haven't talked about the pandemics, and we won't, because it's not it's not an economical issue. Well, yeah, there's impact, a lot of big impacts, but we won't address that. There's, we've heard every day we're talking about that, so we're trying to do things a bit differently here. Before the pandemic, though, we were talking about the environment. It was pretty much up there. The environment was very important. Socially speaking, economically speaking, there were some opportunities. So with the EU, there were some goals to reach out. So within the EU, there was some Horizon 2020 goals, Horizon 2050 goals. What is going to be like, or what are the new goals, or are the goals the same for the UK right now?
I mean, again, I'm quite happy to start with that. I mean, obviously, environment and climate change is actually top of the agenda in the UK. The UK holds two presidencies this year, the COP26, the Environmental Climate Change Conference, which was postponed from last year, so that will take place in Glasgow, in Scotland, in November, and the UK also holds the presidency of the G7, and the meeting should take place in Cornwall in June of this year. Still a physical meeting at this stage, which is being considered. We'll see where we land, and I think for both meetings, certainly there is a great interest in the UK to make that the climate change environment agenda a key priority, not just for the presidency, but for the UK moving forward. There were some very interesting figures over the winter, and some of the storms that we had was were more than 50% of the electricity produced in the UK on some windy days came from renewables, not from carbon fossil energy. So I think it's certainly part of the agenda, and it will continue, as our respective economies and societies evolve. It will continue to be a priority, I would say.
All right. Asking also again the audience, if you have any questions, this is the right time to I think to have some answers to your questions. So don't hesitate to post your questions either on the Q&A at the bottom of your screen or into the chat zone if you have any questions. We're pretty much at the end actually of the webinar, but I want to ask you, how do you as a conclusion, how do you see? I know we've been, I've been asking a lot of questions about trade relationship between Canada, EU, and UK. What about other trade relationships? How it will go? What's the future is going to look like in Britain, in the UK, in Canada, in Europe, in France? Overall, general question, general remarks that you want to address as a conclusion. Maybe starting with Robert, and then we'll go along with the other two conference speakers. Robert?
Yeah, that's a tough one, Sam. Just trying to predict how the next quarter will look is hard enough.
Yes.
Events from the last few years, I've not proved to be very good forecaster.
We'll take
but I just come back. I just come back to we will find ways to make it work, and I think it's, you know, there were some signs of countries retreating from global alliances and partnerships, and I personally think it's that genie is out the bottle, and we're not going to be able to row back, and things will change, but the momentum is ever closer partnerships globally, and in the UK and in Canada and EU, the markets are too important to each other, and we will find a way to continue to grow our relationships.
Olga.
I would say that's a very interesting question, and I think that it will be difficult not to mention COVID here, because obviously it seems like no matter which country we will look at, the recovery plan does include some key themes, and we have also been at EDC looking at how the future will look like and where we want to focus on. And I would say some key themes that we noticed in terms of the sectors. So the green recovery and clean tech, those keep on being the priority. And even though sort of the UK left the EU, the green recovery is pretty much there, whether we're talking about renewables, hydrogen, green buildings, or anything else. And then obviously advanced manufacturing and artificial intelligence and advanced technologies in general, those will be the key priorities and impacting on on all countries and development of different sectors. Agri-food is difficult to sort of forego. It's top of the agenda, and innovation probably underpins all of this. I would think that with innovation and with sort of ESG agenda and sustainability, those will be some of the major themes that we're going to see in the future.
Michael, last word.
Thank you, and I'd like to reflect on two things really. The UK government plans for trade policy moving forward, and also, I mean, we haven't talked about WTO, the World Trade Organization, but there may be some important developments there. So the UK government, I mean, one of the reasons for Brexit, certainly from a political point of view, was this claim to take back control and to have sovereignty and to maybe promote global Britain. And as part of that, there is certainly a willingness to strike new trade agreements with new countries around the world. And yes, there's been a program to essentially secure continuity agreements with the jurisdiction with which the EU already had agreements. But there is now some 4 priorities in terms of the next phase of free trade agreements, and these are with the US, with Australia, with New Zealand, as well as the UK joining the Comprehensive and Progressive Trans-Pacific Partnership, CPTPP. Once, and some of these negotiations are well advanced. Obviously, once these are secured, the UK will look beyond that, maybe reviewing some of the continuity agreements and looking beyond, looking at, places like India, Indonesia, with lots of potential as well. And, there's certainly that willingness to look at places like Asia, places like Africa, lots of growth potential. Again, these are not the region with the closest proximity to the UK, but certainly there are opportunities there. On the WTO, what I would like to say is that the new US administration, the Biden administration, I think it's going to be, we'll have to take some key strategic decisions on how to approach the WTO. The WTO has suffered from the 4 years of the Trump administration, the appellate regime, so the dispute resolution mechanism for international trade. We know that some judges were not nominated, so the appellate court is actually not working at the moment, and the Biden administration will have to see what position they take on the issue. The US was also blocking the appointment of the new Director General to the WTO, and I think we'll need to look what will be the next step for the Biden administration and for USTR, so the US Trade Department, on these important matters. The WTO has been working on important document. There's an initiative on e-commerce. There's also an initiative on domestic regulation, which could help worldwide trade if adopted. And I think I'd like to mention, again, I represent the legal services sector in England and Wales. There was a time where the WTO, or certainly friends of services in the WTO, were negotiating over a trade in services agreement, TISA. And I think that's going to be a key strategic decision for the US as well, whether they want to revisit that and whether they want to start the discussion again with the EU, obviously with other parties, but with now the UK as an independent, with its new independent trade policy. And I think it's worth bearing that in mind when we look at the future of global trade.
Thank you very much for your thoughts. And I would like to say to the audience that this was the first edition of the EU-Canada Conference web conference, virtual conference. There will be more in every 2 months or so, excluding summertime or Christmas time, obviously. We were welcoming Robert Brand, is the managing partner of McCarthy Tétrault in London, and also Michael Laurence, as the head of the International Law Society of England and Wales, and Olga Volkes is the Senior Regional Manager of Western Europe at EDC, also in London. I would like to thank you all, your conference speakers, very interesting, and thank you for the audience, and see you next time in about 2 months or so. All right, take care, everybody.
Thank you, and bye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, bye.